publishing an agent isn't necessarily the end of the process. It's really the beginning of a new phase. Because once an agent is built, it can take time to embed it into the evolving and often messy reality of work. And this can mean approaching the rollout in different ways, having particular stages, making sure that you are aligning with the right stakeholders during the rollout, making sure you're integrating with the right systems, and making sure above all that you're collecting feedback. And a useful sort of high-level distinction to bear in mind here is that agents aren't just tools, they are kind of new habits for a company, especially if they haven't worked with a lot of AI before. And getting people to use them consistently requires a lot of stuff like intentional onboarding and very often parallel workflows with the old way of working along with the new agent as people get used to the new system. So we're going to focus here on a few core areas that are related to this. Number one, are there recognizable stages to a rollout? Who are the major stakeholders and how do you speak with them? How do you know when to start another agent or expand the feature set of the existing one? How do you integrate with existing internal systems? And reviewing, iterating, and handing off your agent. So every rollout can look a little bit different depending on the org or the agent, but there is a kind of basic pattern that works in most cases. Firstly, there's stakeholder review. This usually begins with a clear stakeholder or point of contact reviewing the tool. This is often the main person you've been collaborating with throughout the build, and this marks the first transition into a rollout. Next, there's the alpha, which is usually a small group of people starting to use it alongside their existing process. And this parallel use phase is really important. It builds confidence by allowing users to stick with their existing systems for the operational side of stuff before committing and to try out this new tool. But it does mean asking them to do just that little bit of extra work temporarily while they review kind of both systems, both old and new, alongside each other. From there, you can expand into a full beta where it's kind of expected that the agent will be used by everyone who is expected to use it. Now, of course, you're going to be having feedback all the way through this process, but this is definitely the point where you're going to want to collect the feedback from all of the users on the ground, because there's going to be a lot of valuable information here. And after a certain amount of time, once you've integrated a lot of that feedback, you'll probably move to a full release if everything has gone well. So as you're bringing on all of these different people throughout the stages of the rollout, onboarding is going to be incredibly important. But onboarding isn't just about sort of training or collecting the right data from your users. It's really about creating an immediate sense of relevance and trust for the tool. Because it's that first moment where a user decides whether this tool helps them or slows them down, or whether they have the time of day for it. And Evan had some really good stuff to say on this.
Onboarding's very common, and it's one of the most important parts of the app to figure out, especially if you're doing like a multi-tenant app or something like that within Glide. You have to figure out onboarding, because I mean that's where you're going to have churn if you're worried about that within your app. Adoption could be low if it's an internal app, if people aren't onboarded properly, or it's not enjoyable, or it's not useful, or something like that. I usually like to prove value within the first like 5 seconds of people landing in an app. So like if it's an internal app, maybe that's that Excel spreadsheet that they use that they have to flip through 10 different tabs. The most important information is right at the top of the screen when they load into the app. Like how beautiful is that?
So when you're rolling out an agent, it's really easy to focus on only the key stakeholders. In other words, the people like managers or execs or the key decision makers who have asked you or are working with you to develop the agent. But successful adoption really depends on understanding the users who are actually living with the agent and using it day to day, and that might not be the same. They might be other users than the execs. So this might mean that you need to go a little bit beyond what you're told, provided it's appropriate, and observe how the people in the org are actually working, like where they are, what devices they use, and even how they physically interact with the app. So in this next section, Evan shares how he approaches this sort of bridging the gap between the top level goals and the kind of on the ground realities.
Usually actually the stakeholders that I'm talking to are managers, the C-suite, VPs, stuff like that. But as a builder, I want to hear what they want to tackle, but then I want to get in with users as quickly as possible. I want to like live the life that they live for a little bit and see and hear their pain, so that I can accurately address them. Because sometimes it's like a game of telephone, like they're reporting up what their issues are, and they're kind of translating that with like user feedback, but also like company missions and values. So sometimes like the what we could end up building doesn't actually align to the actual process that the user wants. And also there's a lot of variables that come into effect with users, like where are they using the app? What are they using it on? We run into this sometimes where it's like expected that they use their personal phones, but the personal phones don't have access to the company internet, and then you're relying on data to update and run AI and all that stuff. So, and data and potentially like a warehouse building or something like that where you don't have great reception. So you really want to understand from all perspectives what is actually going to happen, where they're using it, how they're using it. I mean, sometimes even it's like, okay, they're using an iPad. Well, like if they're carrying the iPad and it's not setting down on a desk, they're holding it in their left hand, you may want to put the things that they're touching on the right side. Or maybe even give them an option of like select whether they're right-handed or left-handed, so that maybe we can flip those buttons for them so left-handed people can hit on the left side of the screen. So you really want to understand very thoroughly how the users are going to interact with it every day, because they're the ones that have to live with it after it's launched, and their performance may even depend on it.
So before we get to the how and when to expand, it's important to address a simple but sometimes problematic thing that can come up. Basically, people sometimes refer to the agent as just the main piece of software. Whatever's in the software, the thing that you open to use or that's running in the background is the agent. It's one agent. But sometimes if you've got a tool that's particularly complex with many different sort of AI-powered features inside of it, people will refer to agents within an existing tool. So one app that you might open might have multiple agents inside of it. There's absolutely no official rule here, but it's important to be clear on how people are talking about things with in amongst your stakeholders and collaborators. But either way, a sign that an agent, whatever that is working well, is that people are going to start engaging with you. They're going to give you feedback, sharing opinions, suggestions, improvements, and bringing lots of new problems that they want solved, which is a great sign. But this needs to be handled really carefully, because if you just expand the features without a clear need or intent, this can very quickly bloat the solution and actually dilute the impact. And Evan had some really useful sort of advice on this point.
When you launch a project, I would urge you not to put a bunch of agents within the app. And the reason is it can be kind of overwhelming and actually be a little bit redundant, especially since when we're launching these things, maybe we're not actually sure where an agent's needed for sure. And so you end up spending a lot of time fixing prompts and fixing workflows and stuff that you didn't actually need to do. But what you can see is like after a while, you can see where people are actually spending time at in the app, and Posthog's a great way to do that. You can see where they're spending time and when they're writing a lot of information or reviewing a lot of information within the app, and maybe that's where you can put an agent to then speed up that specific time. I think it's important to try to have feature parity early on in the app build, and then identify one key area where you just know AI will thrive. Because you also have the problem right now of like AI adoption and AI fear and people not believing that it'll actually help them in their jobs. So maybe you'll have people not wanting to use the app for that reason. So you want to put it somewhere where everybody's impressed with what it's doing, so that when the other agent comes out in another part of the app, they're excited to try it and not like, I'm not using that, it's never useful.
So a business already has systems running, ERPs, CRMs, internal tools, spreadsheets, pipelines, and any agent that you are building is going to need to fit into that reality. So in this section, Evan explains a little bit about what it takes to integrate Glide within those systems, and why even when the path isn't obvious or straightforward, spending a little bit of time to find the right solution for integration here is always worth it.
Glide works great with other systems, and I can say that almost always there's a way to go forward with connecting that whatever system you're thinking of with Glide. It may not be an integration in our list, The API docs may not be extremely straightforward. There may be some hoops to jump through, but if it's something that could potentially be saving a company hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, it's probably worth it to figure out what those hoops are.
So once an agent is live, the job isn't necessarily finished, it just changes. The work shifts from building to monitoring and reviewing and evolving the agent if necessary. And ideally, if you've already built in ways to collect feedback from users in the agent itself, that input should remain there because it's really important to keep collecting this. It's not just about fixing bugs, it's about staying in touch and tuning the system based on how it's actually used and how the business is changing. It's like if you were managing a person, you wouldn't train them, send them off, and then never check in again if you were a good manager. And agents kind of need the same sort of attention. And this is especially the case as AI models that are underneath that are powering the agents change and evolve, or as business needs shift. If you're an agency and you've built for a business and you're now stepping away, it's also the time to kind of assign a product owner so that the agent doesn't stagnate. And even if you're not an agency and you're inside of the business and you've built it, it's useful to consider maybe the product owner should not necessarily be you. It's often better to hand it off to someone who's closer to the app's purpose, someone who understands the day-to-day and can respond or collect feedback in context. So here's some useful final thoughts on this from Evan.
Reviewing solutions is interesting because with Glide, when you build it and it's working, it just works. You don't really have to worry about it too often. I will review solutions when new features come out with Glide that drastically improve the user's experience within the app. And I'll build out and rebuild a certain portion of that because maybe I had an idea early on, but like that wasn't quite possible at the time. There are times where a feature, a component, workflows is a big example from earlier this year where I just need to rebuild part of it. Another time is when you get workflow or actions error notifications on an app. Depending on the frequency of those, it's best to track those down as soon as possible and try to figure out what's going on, because if it's happening to one person, it can happen to everyone. So figuring out what's going on with that.
And when you do get these errors and you're in this step of troubleshooting, you can always refer back to the strategies that we covered in the error handling section of this course. So that was a deep dive into publishing and incorporating agents into work. We had a look at the different stages of rollout, the kind of stakeholders you need to engage, when to expand versus create new agents, and Evan's thoughts on integration and handing off.